I used to believe betrayal looked like screaming matches and broken plates. But the real betrayal? It was silent. It showed up in quiet whispers, secret transactions, and a name I'd never heard, Ilia Maro. That's when I realized I'd been funding my husband's affair. And that was just the beginning. Saw stood in the doorway, her hand resting on the cold metal of the doorknob. The house felt eerily quiet, too quiet. Something was off, and she could feel it in her bones. It was the little things at first, whispers in the middle of the night, bank statements that didn't add up, and that one name, Ilia Maro, that kept cropping up in the most unexpected places. Her mind raced, chasing down fragments of memories that now seemed to carry a weight she hadn't noticed before. Dean, her husband, had always been the smooth-talking charmer, the one who could sell ice to an Eskimo with a smile. But now, there was something different in the air. She couldn't quite put her finger on it yet, but the shift was palpable. The quiet phone calls at odd hours. The strange way he'd been brushing off her questions, deflecting with a casual ease that felt like an act. Sa knew her husband well enough to see the cracks forming in his perfect facade, but that didn't make the discovery any easier. The first time it hit her like a brick was when she noticed the withdrawal notifications on her phone, $500 here, $1,200 there, small amounts, almost unnoticeable in the grand scheme of things. She shook her head, telling herself that it was probably for something mundane. But the feeling gnawed at her, growing stronger as she dug deeper. There was no way around it now. Something wasn't right. The numbers didn't lie. These were withdrawals that didn't fit with their usual expenses, and Dean had always been the one to handle the finances. What hit her next was far more unsettling, the whispers. She had caught him on the phone late one night, but this wasn't a typical conversation. His voice had dropped low, almost in a whisper, like he was trying to hide something. Sa's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she strained to listen from the hallway. She doesn't suspect anything yet. The words hung in the air, a dagger aimed straight at her trust. Her breath caught, a cold chill sweeping through her body. Who was he talking to? What was happening behind her back? Her mind spun with questions, none of which had answers. Sa felt like the rug was being pulled out from under her, piece by piece, and all she could do was watch as her world began to crack. Her instinct told her to confront him right then and there, but she hesitated. She wasn't ready yet. Not for the truth, not for the inevitable fallout. Instead, she chose to play it cool, to bide her time and gather the facts before making any rash decisions. She had been with Dean for years, long enough to know when something was off, but this was different. The next morning, she found herself staring at the bank statement again, her fingers trembling slightly as she swiped through the transactions. The names and dates blurred together, but one stood out, Ilia Maro. Who was this person? Why was their name tied to these transactions? Sa's stomach twisted in knots. This was no coincidence. As she sat there, her heart pounding in her chest, the door creaked open behind her. Dean's voice, thick with sleep, broke the silence. "Morning, babe. What's for breakfast?" He sounded casual, almost too casual. But Sa wasn't fooled. His presence felt different now, like a stranger had replaced the man she had once known. "Just going over some things," she muttered, trying to keep her voice steady. She wasn't ready to confront him yet, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and they were growing fast. As she turned to face him, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Was this the beginning of the end? Could she trust him anymore? Her mind screamed at her, but her mouth stayed silent. This wasn't the time. Not yet. But Sa knew one thing for sure, whatever was happening behind closed doors, she wasn't going to sit idly by. She would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it was. The journey ahead was uncertain, and Sa had no idea what she would discover next. But one thing was clear, her marriage was crumbling, and she had to brace herself for the storm that was coming. The question now was, how would she fight back? Sa sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. Her fingers trembled as she held the bank statement, the numbers blurring before her eyes. The joint account she and Dean had shared for years now seemed like a stranger's. Small, frequent withdrawals, each just under the $200 mark, had begun appearing in the past few months. At first, she dismissed them as routine expenses. But now, each transaction felt like a thread unraveling the fabric of their shared life. Her gaze fixed on a particular entry, a $180 withdrawal labeled Ilia Maro. The name was unfamiliar, foreign even. She had never heard Dean mention anyone by that name. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Dean had been hiding something from her. Saw's mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of their life together. Had she missed the signs? Had she been so blinded by trust that she failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface? The withdrawals, the secrecy, the unexplained absences, could they all be connected? Determined to uncover the truth, Saw began her investigation. She started by reviewing past bank statements, noting any irregularities or patterns. The name Ilia Maro appeared several more times, each transaction eerily similar in amount and timing. She cross-referenced these entries with Dean's calendar, but there was no mention of anyone named Ilia Maro. No meetings, no appointments, no events, nothing. Each new piece of evidence left her feeling more certain that something was deeply wrong. There was no way that these withdrawals were random, no way that Dean's behavior, his sudden secrecy, could be explained by coincidence. Her suspicion grew with every passing hour, like a weight settling in her chest, crushing her from within. The truth was out there, but each step she took brought her closer to a reality she wasn't ready to face. Saw's next step was to confront Dean. She waited until he returned home from work, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was unnervingly quiet, and as the door creaked open, her palms grew clammy. She knew this moment would come, the moment when she would have to ask him directly, the moment when the facade would finally crack. "Dean," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, "who is Ilia Maro?" The words came out colder than she intended, but the icy edge was necessary. She had no room left for deception. Dean's face paled, his eyes darting away from hers. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Saw could see the guilt written all over him, the weight of his lies pressing down on him. She could feel the shift, the moment when everything changed. There was no going back now. She had discovered the cracks in their relationship, and the truth was too heavy to ignore. I can explain," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. But Saw was no longer listening. The trust they had built over the years had shattered in an instant, and no explanation could mend the broken pieces. The damage was done. She had seen the truth, and nothing he could say would erase what she had uncovered. Her heart ached as she watched him squirm, trying to justify the unjustifiable. The lies had piled up over the years, each one more elaborate than the last. Saw had always believed in their love, but now, she saw it for what it truly was, a carefully constructed facade, built on manipulation and deceit. As Dean attempted to justify his actions, Saw's mind wandered back to the early days of their relationship. She remembered the late-night conversations, the shared dreams, the promises they made to each other. How had they gone from that to this? How had Dean's love turned into betrayal? The weight of the years they had spent together now felt like a lie. What had she missed? Had she been so blind that she failed to see the warning signs? The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. Saw moved through her daily routine like a ghost, her mind consumed by the revelations about Dean's deceit. She sought solace in friends, in therapy, in journaling, anything to make sense of the chaos swirling inside her. But nothing seemed to help. No matter how much she tried to rationalize it, the truth remained: the man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, was not the person she thought he was. But the more she uncovered, the deeper the betrayal seemed. Dean had been planning to leave her, to take everything they had built together and walk away without a second thought. The name Ilia Maro was not just a stranger, it was a symbol of his secret life, a life he had kept hidden from her. The withdrawals weren't just financial manipulations, they were part of a larger scheme, a plan that had been in motion for months, maybe even years. The shock of it all was overwhelming. How could Dean, who had promised to love and protect her, be capable of something so cruel? The lies he had told, the secrets he had kept, now seemed like a never-ending web, each thread leading to another revelation, another piece of the puzzle. And with each new discovery, Saw's distrust grew deeper, the emotional weight of the betrayal heavier. In the end, Saw realized that the greatest deception was not just the financial manipulation, but the emotional manipulation that had accompanied it. Dean had gaslighted her, made her question her own reality, her own worth. He had used her love against her, turning it into a weapon to control and deceive. For so long, she had believed in him, trusted him with her heart and her future. But now, she saw the truth, he had never truly loved her. He had only used her for his own gain. But Saw was no longer the woman who had blindly trusted. She was stronger now, wiser. She had uncovered the lies, faced the truth, and taken back control of her life. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, she would never allow herself to be deceived again. She had fought too hard, faced too many obstacles, to let Dean's betrayal define her. As she sat alone in the quiet of her home, Saw felt a sense of peace settle over her. The storm had passed, and though the damage was done, she had survived. And that, she realized, was the first step toward healing. The road to recovery would be long and painful, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Saw sat at the kitchen table, her fingers clenched around the crumpled bank statement, heart racing. The dim glow from the morning light made the paper feel heavier than it should. It had been a quiet morning, the usual hum of the refrigerator a soft background to her thoughts. But today, everything had changed. Saw had been married to Dean for 7 years, and they had built a life together that she had thought was unshakable. But now, the numbers on the paper, the unexplained withdrawals, were telling her a story she couldn't ignore. The tightness in her chest was a constant reminder that she wasn't in control anymore, at least, not until she figured out what had really been going on. She had already seen a few smaller withdrawals before, all just under $200. Routine expenses, she had thought. Dean had always managed the finances, and she had trusted him implicitly. He took care of the bills, the savings, the investments, everything. But now, as she scrolled through the statements, her heart sank. These were no longer small withdrawals, there was a pattern emerging, something more sinister. Each one was timed, almost like clockwork, and there was no explanation for any of them. Then, her eyes froze on one particular entry, Ilia Maro, followed by a withdrawal of $180. The name didn't ring any bells. It didn't belong to anyone she knew. The fact that she hadn't heard of it before was the first red flag. Her mind began to race. Who was Ilia Maro? Was it a business transaction? A client, maybe? But why would Dean be making payments to someone Saw had never heard of? A cold shiver ran down her spine. Her stomach churned as the realization sank in. Dean had been hiding something from her. Saw's fingers tightened around the statement, the paper crinkling under the pressure. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, about secrets that had been carefully buried beneath years of shared history. Saw's mind spun as she tried to recall the last few months. Dean had been distant lately, more distant than usual. Long hours at work, unexplained absences, and the subtle avoidance of eye contact whenever she asked about his day. It had all seemed insignificant at the time, just the normal stresses of life. But now, everything seemed connected, like the pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered in front of her, and she had just started putting them together. She couldn't just sit there. The need for answers was overwhelming. Saw started going through the rest of the bank statements, cross-referencing the transactions, her eyes scanning the pages in a frantic search for any more signs of deceit. The name Ilia Maro appeared again and again, in the same pattern. The amounts were always the same, slightly under $200, and the dates seemed to coincide with times when Dean was supposedly out of the house, working late or on business trips. This wasn't a coincidence. Saw felt a surge of anger rising in her chest. The thought of how long Dean had been hiding this from her made her feel sick. She had trusted him with everything, and now, she was questioning everything. Her next step was inevitable. She needed to confront him. Saul wasn't sure what she was expecting, an apology, an explanation, perhaps a confession. But what she didn't expect was the flood of emotions that rushed through her as she prepared to face him. She was terrified, yes, terrified of what she might uncover, terrified of the confrontation, but also angry. Angry at herself for being blind to the signs, angry at Dean for betraying her trust. But she wasn't going to be weak anymore. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her any longer. She had to do this. For herself. Dean's return home that evening was like any other, except for the knot in Saw's stomach that had been growing tighter all day. She had rehearsed the conversation in her mind 1,000 times, but now that the moment was here, she felt unsteady, unsure of how to begin. She watched him come in, his briefcase in hand, a tired smile on his face. He looked the same as he always did, unassuming, calm, but to Saw, everything about him felt different. The man she had married had been replaced by someone unrecognizable, someone who was capable of hiding such a massive secret. "Dean," she started, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She held up the bank statement, her finger pointed at the transaction. "Who is Ilia Maro?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dean froze. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His face paled, his eyes darting away from hers. Saul watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. The guilt was written all over him. She didn't need him to say anything more. She already knew the truth. I can explain," Dean stammered, but Saw cut him off. "No," she said firmly, her voice cold. "You don't get to explain this away. Not this time." He opened his mouth to say something else, but the words never came. Saul wasn't listening anymore. She had heard enough lies over the years to recognize one when she heard it. It was all too much. The betrayal wasn't just in the money, it was in the way he had manipulated her, made her question her own sanity. She could feel the weight of his gaslighting, the way he had twisted her perception of reality. But not anymore. She wasn't going to let him control her. "Why?" Saw asked, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure if it was from anger or heartbreak. "Why would you do this to me, to us?" Dean shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering. "It's not like that, Saw. You don't understand." Saw wasn't sure she could take much more of his weak explanations. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let him see her weakness. The hurt was suffocating, but she had to keep her composure. He had already taken so much from her. Now, it was her turn to take back control. "Don't you dare try to make me feel crazy," Saw whispered, her voice low but filled with raw emotion. "I'm not stupid, Dean. I know exactly what you've been doing. All those nights you said you were working late. The way you've pulled away. The lies, the secrets, it's all adding up now." Dean opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Saul wasn't sure if it was because he couldn't find a way to lie his way out of it or if he was simply running out of excuses. Either way, the man who had once been her partner, her confidant, was nothing but a stranger now. The confrontation felt endless, but somehow, Saul knew she had reached a turning point. The woman who had once blindly trusted was gone. In her place was a woman who would fight for herself, who would no longer be gaslit, no longer manipulated. As Dean fumbled for words, Saw stood tall, her heart heavy but resolute. The truth was out now, and nothing would ever be the same again. As Dean stumbled through more denials, trying to manipulate her back into his web, Saw couldn't help but think back to the years they had spent together. The memories felt distant now, like a life she had once lived but was no longer part of. The shared promises, the future they had once planned, all of it had been a lie. And the man standing before her wasn't the person she had loved. With a final glance at him, Saw turned and walked away, her resolve hardening with every step. She wasn't going to be vulnerable anymore. She was done with the manipulation, done with the deceit. What was ahead would be difficult, but she could already feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. This was just the beginning of reclaiming her life. The battle for control had just begun, and Saw wasn't going to lose. The moment she left the room, a new chapter began. It wasn't just about the confrontation anymore, it was about her strength, her courage, and the unbreakable will to never be deceived again. Saw sat at her desk, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. The papers in front of her were more than just legal documents, they represented a new chapter, one where she would no longer be a victim of deceit. The irrevocable trust she had decided to set up would protect her financial future, keeping it safe from any future manipulations or claims by gain. But the act of securing her assets was not just a financial decision, it was a declaration of her newfound strength and independence. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the details once more. The decisions she had made in the past few days were monumental. She thought back to the times when Dean had convinced her to trust him with everything, her heart, her future, and even her finances. She had believed in him, believed that the love they shared was real. But the betrayal had shattered that illusion, and now, more than ever, she realized that her financial security, and her emotional well-being, could only come from within her. The thought of trusting someone else again was daunting. But she knew that placing her assets in a trust wasn't about closing off from others. It was about creating boundaries, about protecting herself from someone who had once been so close. The irrevocable trust would ensure that no matter what happened, she would have control over her future, and the control would be hers alone. As she sat there contemplating the decision, she felt a wave of mixed emotions, relief, sadness, but above all, empowerment. She was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by betrayal. She was a woman who had taken charge of her life, someone who understood that securing her future was not only a financial matter but an emotional one too. In the weeks following her decision, Saw found herself going through a period of emotional growth. The act of securing her finances had triggered a shift in her thinking. She realized that for years, she had sacrificed her own needs and desires for the sake of her marriage. But now, she was reclaiming herself. Every step she took, from signing the trust documents to managing her finances independently, reaffirmed her